Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world. Today we're looking at the most recent development diary for Warhammer Old World, and I think there's some interesting information contained within it. We've got a bit more detail about when the game will be set, and we've also got information about which factions will be given some love when the game is first released. So let's start with looking at the armies. Now this is quite interesting because the Warhammer community page, when it was first released, divided these factions into what it was called good and evil. That information has since been changed and they're now just listed as the core factions. Now I don't know the reason for this, but there was a lot of discussion, I think, in some of the forums around whether good and evil was the right description for the factions being laid out, but overall, hey, doesn't really matter. I did wonder initially whether there was going to be anything around allies or anything like that, but this suggests that's perhaps me barking up the wrong tree. But anyway, we have core factions. What are they? Well, firstly, we have the Empire of Man. Probably not a great surprise given the game is set around the time of the Three Emperors, and there has been some discussion already through the developer diaries about what that means and having three Empire sub-factions. We've got the Dwarven Mountain Holds, again fairly sensible. They're pretty key to the old world story and hold the key mountain passes, protecting the Empire from roving bands of ne'er-do-wells and monsters and other creatures. We've got the Kingdom of Bretonnia. No surprise there, we knew that was coming. They've told us about a couple of the miniatures already. We've got the Wood Elf Realms. Interesting, so definitely part of the old world, being so closely connected geographically to Bretonnia. I'm not really sure what Wood Elves were up to at this particular point in time. Fairly reclusive, but there is that sort of relationship between them and Bretonnia, I suppose, along with the opportunities for fortune hunters invading Athel Loren. We have also listed as the High Elf Realms. Again, interesting. So I've done a previous video looking at what was going on with the High Elves. Do check that out if you'd like to. That was made quite some time before we got this information. So presumably what we're looking at here is some outposts from Uthlin. So the High Elves, having some kind of presence still in the old world. Turning to the factions which were listed as evil originally, we've got the Orcs and Goblins. Now I think that makes really good sense. They're a fun army to collect. I think they're a good starting force. They're a good way of getting people introduced to the game, albeit I fully understand Games Workshop has made it clear that this isn't a starter game for new players. However, Orcs and Goblins are just pretty much fun, with perhaps the exception of the gunline army that emerged in 8th edition with loads of bolt throwers backed by a couple of big blocks of infantry. But hey, you can have a lot of fun with Orcs and Goblins. And as a bit of an aside, I suppose, on those, one of the things that is interesting is I think this is a range where there's definitely some really good mainstream competition, particularly the Goblins from Mantic Games. I think they look really nice and they're at a really good price point. So given that Orcs and Goblins haven't seen love for quite some time and dropped out very early from the Age of Sigmar stuff, I think hopefully all of this will push Games Workshop to look at the models they want to release, particularly for the Orcs, I think, and really make sure that they're lifting their game to provide us with something that people get excited about. Next up, we've got Warriors of Chaos and Beastmen Brayherds. Now, I suppose some people, myself included, perhaps would have liked to have seen a Hordes of Chaos type list as we've seen back in the day, where we can recreate all that fluff, all the stories around groups of beastmen being led by a great champion of chaos, or the forces allying themselves. I suppose to an extent this is before the Great Chaos Incursion, so we're not going to be seeing the great armies attacking the lands of men, but also from a practical perspective, Warriors of Chaos and Beastmen are probably going to play quite differently, so by keeping them separate means you can't use the strengths of one to offset the weaknesses of the other, hopefully helping out from balance purposes. Finally, we've got the Tomb Kings of Khemri. Again, no surprise, we knew they were coming, we knew they were going to be the first ones to get a bit of attention. I'm not really sure that I would describe Khemri as Old World or massively taking part in the story of Old World any more than the Dark Elves, for example. But we are where we are, and we now at least know who's going to get the attention in the first waves of releases, so we can bear that in mind when making our plans. And information like this, whether you agree with the content or not, I think is always good, always helpful, because now we know. I think somewhat helpfully as well, the developer diary goes on to talk about the factions that aren't getting initial attention, although there is confirmation there will be rules available for them as PDFs. These will be free, so people can still play their existing 8th edition armies. This covers the Dark Elf Skaven, Vampire Counts, Demons of Chaos, Ogre Kingdoms, Lizardmen, and Chaos Dwarves. Now, the list goes on to explain why these other factions aren't included in the first wave. Talking about the Skaven Under Empire being riven by civil war. It's got the von Carsteins having been defeated. Again, it's information which points towards when exactly in the time of the Three Emperors the game is set. I had wondered if perhaps it would be set a little bit earlier than that, so you had the von Carsteins starting to emerge and building their power base. Something that could have been, again, interesting for the storyline, giving their so important around that point in time for really bringing people together to go and vanquish them, because they were such a dangerous threat, certainly to the Empire. Dark Elves, Lizardmen, Chaos Dwarves and Ogre Kingdoms are a long way away, and during this period are said to be inward looking and insular. Obviously Dark Elves may well be on the prowl doing some raids, looking for slaves and stuff, but they're suggesting this is during a quiet period of activity. Now this does leave one big question, of course, which is, what about Kislev? There's been a lot of excitement about the prospect of Kislev coming into the game, getting some representation, particularly that rivalry, that interactions with the Warriors of Chaos up in the north as raids start to come south ahead of the invasion by Azavar Cold. So maybe a little bit disappointing that Kislev don't get a mention. We can only assume that if they are going to get the attention everyone's hoping for, that will come in future waves when perhaps some of the more insular races, as they're noted, start to make a bit more of an appearance. From a practical perspective, I suppose Games Workshop don't know exactly how well Warhammer is going to do when it gets re-released. So to release lots of new models, lots of new factions would be quite a gamble. So having Kislev perhaps fairly near the top of the queue for new stuff, if things go well, would make sense. The other big thing I led with was time frames, and let's quickly touch on that. So we've known for a while the game's going to be set during the time frame of the Three Emperors, which is a period of time several hundred years long. And there's been a lot of speculation as to exactly where it falls. The article makes clear that the game is going to be set in the decades leading up to the Great War Against Chaos and the invasion of Kislev by Azavar Cold. So really we have now a 20 to 30 year period of time where the game is going to be set. Again, quite helpful because it now allows us to gauge where we are in the story if we're going to be setting our games in some kind of narrative. The article finishes by commenting that the old world is marching closer to release, and there'll be another developer diary coming at some time in June. So I think there's plenty to be excited about. We know which armies are going to be coming out. We know they are quite a diverse range of armies, but also really tying into those core fantasy rule sets, those core fantasy ideas: elves, dwarves, orcs, men, chaos, all this sort of stuff. So I can't say overly that I'm disappointed. I know some people will, because they may have armies or be wanting to collect the armies that aren't going to see that initial attention. But I think, yeah, overall content of this developer diary is useful. It's taking us in the right direction, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this video and others I've produced, do consider dropping a like and subscribe if you've not already. I'm Return to the Old World. Have a great day.